All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the Athletes Podcast with our 6th episode featuring Matt Comand, a high-performance coach from Consistent Elite Performance. He has worked with elite athletes, coaches, teams, and executives. He was a professor in the School of Hospitality, Recreation, and Tourism at Humber College. He was an undergraduate at Brock Sport Management Program, and he also graduated with a Master's of Sport and Performance Psychology from the University of Denver. Please welcome Matt Comand and give us a little introduction about yourself.
Sure. So you covered quite a bit of it, but thanks for having me. Happy to be here. And yeah, so I graduated Brock as well in the Sport Management Program 2009, and then worked for a couple years, and then, like you said, went on to the University of Denver to do a Master's in Sport and Performance Psychology. And that was, we did a lot of applied work in school, and worked a lot with athletes there in different schools, working on building mental skills, life skills, things like that. And then since upon kind of returning back home, working with a lot of teenage clients, kind of on the elite sport track, whether it's AAA hockey, provincial level, junior hockey, NCAA, some athletes down in the States as well. So working with athletes that way quite a bit. And like you said, I was at Humber College teaching sports psychology for 5 years, and then a colleague of mine and I in the last year or so have started a consulting firm. So now working more with him and working more with businesses as well.
Very cool. Good for you. That's impressive.
Yeah, it's fun.
So is that something, the sports psychology has become so prevalent in the last 10, 15 years in the world of sport? Is that something you've found you hit at the right point with your education?
Wow,
now moving into
that's a really good question, actually. It's definitely not universal yet, but it is growing. It's getting more prevalent in the press and in media. I think specifically in individual sports, like soccer and golf and stuff like that. But even in team sports, I think more and more pro sports teams and college teams have a full-time sports psychologist or mental skills coach or performance consultant, whatever they want to be called.
Right.
And I think that's a really good observation. It is a really good time. I think it's like I said, it's becoming more popular and more common. And I think earlier in my career, I would get calls from coaches or parents saying things like, "Oh, my son's a pitcher. He can't get out of his own head. He's a head case. Can you help him?" Where it was a very kind of like a fix-it model.
Right.
Where we get less calls like that now. Now I think parents and coaches understand it's not necessarily something's wrong with this athlete that needs to get fixed. Yeah. It's just, can we add this level of preparation? We all do physical prep, skills training, extra sessions with skills coaches, nutrition, sleep, all that kind of stuff. Can we add this extra level of preparation to help them meet different demands that their sport gives them? So
becoming sort of proactive instead of reactive with that training.
Absolutely. Yeah. So just met with a couple of new parents in the last month, a couple of new families, and that's exactly it. There's no pressing issue per se. There's always things that maybe some parents or athletes or coaches see that, like, hey, I don't like how I reacted there. Yeah. And this seems to be a bit of a pattern, but it is a lot more proactive in terms of, when they get to the next level or when they experience stress, we want to give them the tools so that they have them in the moment rather than that reaction piece that you talked about, the reactive piece.
So give me an example. For instance, I played golf growing up, but I was that guy that people would, consider the head case. I'd get in my head, get nervous, I'd shank one hard right. So what are some of those steps, if you were to give me a Coles Notes version, how I would prepare for that?
So in the last few years, the biggest thing I've tried to work on with myself, first of all, but clients too, is staying present. Okay. So our society, in sports in general, but in everything, is very outcome dependent, very results based. If I do well, then I'll get this. If I do well in school, then I'll get a good job. If, then. And when we're focused too much on potential consequences, we forget what we have to do in the moment. Right. So for golf, for example, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So for golf, for example, you might be thinking, I used to golf a lot too, and it's like, oh, if I just par out, I'll break 90 or I'll break 80 or whatever, right? Yeah. So it's like, what ifs, right? And then instead of just staying in the zone, staying in your rhythm, now you're thinking, oh, if if I make this putt, I'll birdie, or if I make this putt, I'll have a career low. And again, you're thinking about something 30 minutes down the road or an hour down the road, and it's all outcome based. Instead of focusing on your routine, focusing on your focus anchors, we call them. So like, where do you need to direct your attention to make good decisions and to play well, and just focusing on those things deliberately,
right?
Knowing where you need to direct your attention to be at your best.
Okay.
The other thing that's extremely common with athletes, a lot of coaches and parents ask us about anger management.
Okay.
We call it emotional regulation, but
the PC version.
The PC version, but it's absolutely critical, and it's really common, where we talk a lot with clients about their sweet spots. So on a 1 to 10 scale, 1 is you're half asleep, you're kind of going through the motions, you're not into it at all, and 10 is like you're ramped up like crazy, like you're fired up, you're so excited.
Yeah.
On that scale, where are you at your best?
Right.
And depending on your sport, depending on your personality, depending on a lot of things, it could be a 4, it could be a 7, it could be a 9, like it could be anything.
Yeah.
But having that awareness to know, when am I at my best? And then in the game, or in the golf round, or in the match, or whatever it is, can you say, like, not just be at a 12 out of 10 and be totally ramped up, but can you say, oh my God, I'm not in my sweet spot right now. Yeah. Right? And then the third piece is we help build the tools to get you back there.
And stay there.
Yeah. So that a bad shift doesn't turn into a bad period, doesn't turn into a bad game, right?
Makes sense.
Or a bad hole, one blow up hole doesn't turn into a bad round.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Reset routines are huge. We do a lot of breathing work, which seems maybe simple, but breathing is a huge mental skill that we work on a lot. We do a lot of mindfulness, and then we do a lot of just self-exploration and self-awareness exercises and discussion where, we try to diagnose a freak out or a lot of stress, where it's like, when you have your meltdowns, is there a pattern to that? Is it, is the referee a huge trigger for you? Is getting benched a huge trigger for you? Is getting called out by your coach? Is missing a putt you should make? And those triggers are different for different people, but there can be patterns for them that is just the end all be all, and how you go off a cliff and the rest of your match is kind of in the toilet, right? So identifying triggers and building plans to kind of reset after them,
right?
And that would be so kind of staying present and the emotional regulation piece.
So when you mentioned the trigger part, is that something that you consciously make them aware of and then have them avoid, or is it basing it on that reset because it's inevitable in some cases?
Yeah, I would say the second one. It's inevitable in some cases. Actually, in most cases, I would say, because you're going to experience adversity no matter what you do. There's going to be bad refs. Your coach is going to give you critical feedback at times. Yeah. Your teammate is going to make a mistake. You're going to not play your best all the time. Like, those are things that happen. And if we can be aware of them, and again have that reset plan, and just bring awareness to, hey, like that last month that would have totally rattled me, but I'm going to go through my anchors, I'm going to go through my breathing, I'm going to take a drink of water, whatever your reset routine is that we've kind of built together. Now you can kind of take a breath and get back at it. I think the biggest, I tell athletes all the time, focusing is pretty easy. It's refocusing that's difficult. So when you're in that red zone, when you're in that headspace of freaking out, or not even freaking out, but just even putting yourself down and getting down on yourself, bad body language, all that kind of stuff, it's difficult to reset. That's one of the biggest challenges, I think, for athletes and me when I work with athletes, is in the moment when things aren't going well, can you reset? And that's what we work on a lot. Because when you and I talk about it in a session, over a counter, over a table, it's like, oh yeah, I'll just breathe and I'll go through it and it's fine. That sounds great. We've built this great reset routine. But when the emotions are high, when you're in the heat of the battle, that's the biggest transition that's difficult, I think, for athletes.
Yeah, it used to be that there was so much focus on, just practice, make sure that you have that muscle memory, which is still a factor. But, when you're coming down that 18th green and you've got a tough shot to make, and, you can have practiced all day long, but if you're nervous inside your head and you're not comfortable hitting that shot the same way you should be, if you're in that 1 to 10 scale at a nice 5, calm, cool, collected, you're going to be in trouble, right?
And that's the thing where, I would say trust your training, go through your routine. If you've practiced well and you've been on the range and been with your coach, you should be. You've earned the right to be confident. You've earned the right to trust your training. Your body knows what to do. Yeah. Whether it's an 8-iron into the 18th green or whatever, like your body can hit that shot, right? So you don't have to be so perfect and be rigid and tell your brain, or tell your brain to tell your body, follow through with your hips or snap your wrists or whatever the cues are. Like your body knows how to do it. Yeah. So that's where I think a lot of overthinking comes in, especially in a sport like golf, where there's a lot of downtime and it's not a high-paced environment like soccer, hockey, lacrosse, volleyball, those like more dynamic sports. Right. Where you can kind of get in your head a little bit more.
For sure. Yeah. And is this, so you started, going back to your undergrad, was this sport and performance psychology something you had an interest in, or was that fostered throughout your 4 years and then, you found that program at the University of Denver, or take me through that journey?
I think I was always interested in, I was a pro sports fan growing up, watching Leafs, Jays, Raptors, and the NFL and different pro sports teams, and I was always really interested in how teams went from being really bad to being really good. And whether that's a new GM, a new coach, new players, culture change, all that kind of stuff, like that, even as a kid, I was like, how did that happen? So that was, always a passion of mine, and trying to read about different teams and leadership and coaching. And then in fourth year at Brock, I took, I think it was 4P09.
Leadership. Dr. Kirsty's Fence.
Yeah.
Leadership.
Leadership in sport.
Yeah.
And that class, I think, was a huge catalyst for me, and being like, this is what I'm passionate about. This is what I want to get into. So, started reading more about coaching, and then I started coaching in 2010. And I coached 8-year-olds, single A hockey in Newmarket, and loved it. Yeah, fell in love with it. We had a great group of parents, and I know hockey parents can get a bad rap at times, but this was like the best hockey parent group I've ever had, and I'm still friends with a lot of them today, and they were so supportive. I was like 22. Yeah, like I had no business being the head coach of a team with no coaching experience.
Just like I have no business hosting a podcast,
but,
right?
Exactly. Yeah. But they were so welcoming, and I made a lot of mistakes, I'm sure, but they were amazing. And because of that positive experience, I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to get into coaching and high performance. And so I started researching different programs, Masters of Coaching, Masters of Leadership, Masters of Sports Psych, and this one at DU came up and just really resonated with me, and I applied, and luckily I was able to trick them and they let me in. Yeah. And moved down there for 2 years, and it was even better than I thought. It was just an amazing experience. The professors were outstanding. Our fellow students were so great. I learned so much from them. And very applied program. So we got right in, started working with athletes and shadowing second years and kind of being a part of that process right away. And then, my love for it and passion for it just grew, and I kept coaching all along when I was there. Moved back home to Toronto area and kept coaching and started working with athletes more and more.
Incredible.
So that, like I said, that 4P09 class was probably the big catalyst.
Was that, did you have, or did an idea stem from, because in that class you have to do a sort of term project. Was that where, did you have a focus on that, or was it something completely different?
I don't remember that level of detail, maybe. Yeah. I remember doing a group project with a few other students.
Just because I know Dr. Spence will be listening to this.
I know. Yeah. No, I don't remember exactly what we did in terms of our project. Okay. But I just remember
that's
that.
okay.
Yeah, that like all the literature from that class, and obviously Kirsty's amazing. So that was huge.
Yeah, she was one of my. She was very instrumental in my 4 years at Brock as well. So take me through that, or take us through, I guess, the comparison from going to Brock, sub 20,000 students, to going to DU. What's that school like? What's it like down there?
So DU is actually smaller than Brock.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so when I was there was about 12,000 students, split pretty evenly between undergrad and grad students.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So there was a law school, there was a business school, and our school was by far the smallest, but it was mostly grad students. I want to say like 6,000, and undergrad was about, let's say, 6,000 too. So I think it's the biggest NCAA school without a football team. So Brock doesn't have football, obviously.
He avoided football.
My high school didn't have a football team, so no football. But luckily for me, with my passion with hockey, it's a huge hockey school. So they had won a few national championships, and then they just won in 2017, a couple years ago. So that was really fun. I lived across the street from the arena. We would go to games, a couple times a month, whatever.
Nice.
8,000 people, maybe 10,000 people in Magnus Arena.
Unreal
atmosphere. Really fun. The lacrosse team, I think they're the only team in the Western states that have made it to like the Final Four in lacrosse. It's a huge lacrosse following as well. So it was amazing. Like I could talk about it forever. The school itself was outstanding. It was a beautiful campus, red brick, kind of that side of things. Yeah. And then, Denver's super clean city, super young city, super fun. Colorado is the most active state, the healthiest state. So there's people, the mountains are an hour away. There's tons of hiking, tons of biking, tons of running. It's just, there's so much to do. The nightlife's fun. Like, it's just, there's so much going on.
Sounds incredible.
It was awesome. If you haven't been to Denver, you should go. And they have, I think Denver has like 11 pro sports teams or something. So they've got the 4 major ones, and they've got 2 lacrosse teams. They have the Rapids. I think they have the Colorado Eagles, which is an American League team. So if you're a sports fan, there's tons to do, tons to see. Like I said, the downtown core is awesome. Yeah. So it's great.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's good.
So reverting back to, you talked about not having football in high school, university, and then post-grad. Is that something that you have to mitigate with maybe not as much knowledge on other sports in comparison with if you don't have, football, for instance, but huge on hockey? If you've got athletes coming from different sports, how do you manage that? Are you going and doing some research behind the scenes, or what's that process?
Great question. So this is a huge topic when we were in our masters as well, because normally, whatever sport you're comfortable with is like, I want to work in that sport. I want to work with athletes in that sport, whether it's hockey, soccer, volleyball, track, whatever it is, right? And our profs really encouraged us, and I think the industry in general, sports psych discipline, like they really encourage you to work with athletes in sports you know nothing about. Just to broaden your horizons, learn more about it. I tried to do some research just in terms of like vocabulary and some slang and stuff. Like you don't want to, if someone scores a touchdown, you don't want to call it a goal. Like just stuff like that. Like
so that it bridges the gap and you sound at least somewhat knowledgeable.
Exactly. You don't want to like alienate yourself right away. But I've worked with speed skating, which I know nothing about. Okay. I had 2 judo guys a couple years ago. I know nothing about judo. So you learn different moves and different slang and how matches work and points. So you can definitely educate yourself. I didn't really play any individual sports growing up. Okay. I basically played baseball and hockey my whole life. So, and some volleyball and stuff. But working with individual sports is a whole different dynamic in terms of, on one hand, you have no support in a way. You don't have teammates. But on the other hand, some people like that. Yeah. Where it's like, I'm in control of my destiny here. I don't have to rely on anybody else. I've noticed the coach-athlete relationship can be really different between individual sports and team sports because it's like one-on-one all the time. And then in team sports, obviously, there's 10 to 15 kids on the team probably. But no, I think it's a great question. So I still, most of our clients are hockey. Okay. Just because my buddy Cassie and I, we both coached, we both played hockey. Our network is hockey. Right. But we have clients in all sorts of different sports. And now, kind of like I said before, branching out into different areas, not even in sport. And
you're constantly looking to add more athletes to this?
Always looking for new clients.
Okay, so where can people find you if they're interested more?
So ConsistentElitePerformance.com is the website. Consistent Elite Performance on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, any kind of social media site, LinkedIn. So you can reach out. My email is matt@ConsistentElitePerformance.com. So nice and simple. You can reach out there. So yeah, any social media, you can follow us. We post a ton of videos and educational videos, and then some just kind of short tidbits about sports psychology or some strategies for parents, athletes. Okay. So, yeah.
And do you focus on, you mentioned there, just the parents aspect as well as because there's so much that's going on, and, you know, knowing this, having experienced it, you know, that parent-child relationship, parent-athlete, do you work with, you know, families in a sense as well then? Or are you working towards what parents should be saying on downtime as well?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of team workshops with the parent group. So that's more of an introduction as to, you know, what sports psychology is, what are some effective parenting communication styles, some feedback styles. Here's what the research is saying about elite youth athletes and their parents and things like that. And then with our individual clients, a lot of our communication is with the parents. So like I said, most of our clients are under 18.
Right.
We definitely have a level of confidentiality with the client, but then we'll touch base with the parents all the time. You know, they'll update us with how things are going with the team, with the coach. You know, they're upcoming. Oh, we're going to this tournament out of town, and you want to, you know, touch on that. Or, you know, lately a few of our clients have been going through some stuff in school, so just to give us a heads up as to, hey, this is what's happened, or this is what's coming up in school, just to give us a broader awareness of their life. So we're constantly communicating with the parents, and sometimes we'll have kind of mini sessions with the parents where we'll sit down before the athlete and say, hey, can we talk to you about this? Like, how should we have handled this, or how should we, you know, communicate with the coach, or this is what's going on, how can we best support him? So a lot of communication with parents as well.
Gotcha. It's cool that you're able to integrate it on so many different levels.
Yeah, I think, like I said, sport, you know, youth sport parents can get a bad rap, but in my experience, like, they just really want to offer the best for their kids and offer the best opportunities, the best support. Yeah. Sometimes they don't know how to do that. Yeah. And sometimes, like all of us, they get emotional at games, or they get wrapped up in everything, and that happens. But just again, developing some awareness as to what are some best practices for parents. And when we work with teams, we try to do similar things we do with the players. Like, we'll have some team identity stuff. What are our team values? How do we want to be represented? What do we want other teams to say about us? That type of stuff. You know, how do we want to behave on the field or on the court or on the ice? And we'll talk the same thing with parents. What kind of parent group do we want to be? Yeah. Okay, they just named A, B, and C, whatever values. Okay, what are some behaviors that really line up with that? What are some behaviors that don't line up with that? Yeah. What are some words we can use that would help us represent those values to other people? What are some things that are not aligned? Right. So, again, we're not changing the world or anything like that. We're just trying to bring some awareness, and parents are really receptive. And in my experience, they're very honest and very vulnerable, and they'll put up their hand and say, you know what? After a long day at work, when I got chewed up from my boss, I rush home, I make dinner that nobody eats, and they're all pissed off about what's for dinner. And we rush to practice or rush to the game. The ref does something, or the coach doesn't play him, and I'm, you know, tired and stressed, and I bang on the glass and scream and yell, and then I lay at home at night wondering what kind of mom I am. And I was like, oh my God, like, these parents are struggling just, you know, sometimes, just like all of us do, and they're so wrapped up in it all. And it's been like a really cool experience for me, just to see how these parents communicate and stuff. So it's super comprehensive and a lot of moving parts for sure.
Yeah, and it's all about directing that energy, right? Yeah. For them. Talking about energy, I met a couple guys at a national conference a couple days ago from Umbria Cafe, based out of Vancouver. They gave us a couple nitro cold brews. I don't know if you're a coffee drinker, but we've got a couple samples here to test out.
Sounds good. Should crack them?
Yeah, you're more than welcome if you want. That was aggressive. Wow. They told me to shake.
That's funny.
That's going to make a good spoof for YouTube. But it's a nice nitro cold brew. It's going to get us really going here. Tap on my screen. All right, well, so directing that energy, do you focus a lot with athletes on, you know, making sure that they're balancing the amount of energy they're putting in, you know, during their training to when they're participating and competing as well? Is there that balance that they should be focusing on?
Yes. Do you mean like physical energy or like
both?
Like training?
Yeah.
schedules?
For instance, I've got if I'm relating it back to my experience, I'll go, you know, as a golfer, you hit your shot and then you try and relax your body, reset, and then you talk about then you get into, once you're over top of the ball, go into your routine.
Yeah.
What's that balance like?
So I would say with most of the athletes I've worked with, in games, they can get too ramped up.
Okay.
So they get too overexcited, lots of muscle tension. Their focus really narrows on whether it's the ref, whether it's a teammate not doing their job, whether it's an opponent trying to trash talk them, whether it's their coach chewing them out, whatever it is. They get really ramped up, and they have to bring that energy level down. And we work a lot on that, as I mentioned, with focus anchors, breathing, imagery and visualization, mindfulness, something called progressive muscle relaxation, which is like breathing and relaxing your muscles. And in a sport like hockey, it's kind of good that there's like a built-in mechanism where you get off the ice pretty like every minute. Right? You get back to the bench, that a minute 30 is your shift, and you can take a drink of water and kind of reset every time. Mm-hmm. In some sports that's more difficult, but in you can always find 5 seconds to just be aware of where your breath is. We do something called like a body scan or a self check-in. So that's in games. I would say that's the more common issue.
Okay.
In practices or in training, and this is where I think some parents and coaches get upset. Typically, they're not as intense as they should be. So they're kind of going through the motions, or they're not into practice, and maybe they're distracted. They're talking about other things. And obviously, your practice should be fun. We're not robots, and we don't have to be super focused all the time. You should be hanging out and kind of chilling with your friends. But when it's time to focus on a drill or a new tactic your coach is implementing, like you got to pay attention, right?
Yeah.
So, and whether it's a very aggressive kind of style practice, like ramping yourself up for practice, is something that's kind of come up more and more lately.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's interesting because you're working with a varied range of age and athletes. Mm-hmm. So do you find it's difficult for, maybe those 10 to 15 year olds compared to the 15 to 20 year olds, for instance, and, making sure that they're focused during that time? Because when they're that younger stage, they may not realize it, but they're building those foundations for the rest of their career, right?
Yeah. I would say once they hit puberty, like a few of our clients are between like 13 and 16. So that's like an interesting age for everybody.
Right.
You start high school, you're going through puberty, different things are going on. Your hormones are going, maybe your personality is changing a little bit. Typically at that age, if you're at the more competitive side, you're traveling more, you're training more, you're not in like youth sport-ish anymore. Mm-hmm. So, we talk a lot about school stuff. We talk a lot about what we're talking about for soccer or hockey or volleyball, how can we apply it to school? How can we apply it to exams? How can we apply it to relationships with your parents or relationships with friends?
Interesting.
Because I tell clients all the time, and parents all the time too, like, if the only place you apply this is sport, I'm only doing half my job. Because at some point, you're going to stop playing competitive sports. It could be when you're 18 and you go to university. It could be when you're 22 and you're done university. It might be when you're 35 and you retire from playing pro or national level sport. Yeah. But at some point, it's going to stop. So can you apply these emotional regulation skills, confidence, focus, performance anxiety, breathing, self-awareness, like all these things we talk about, can you apply them in everyday life? Right? Because, no matter what you do, you're a performer.
Yeah.
Right. So that, that's a conversation we have a lot. With the younger kids, I think you're bang on in terms of just setting a foundation. So we do, with the older kids, we can have like an hour-long session or like 45 to 60 minutes, kind of go through an exercise, process it, go through it, and their attention's like pretty good. Yeah. When you're talking to like a 12 or 10 or 11-year-old, an hour is quite a long time. Yeah. Right? So we do our exercise and stuff, but it's just a bit shorter, and it's a lot more self-exploration, a lot more, we have journals for them to fill out and kind of more written stuff, more tangible stuff. It's not as abstract. And then they can refer back to it when we're not around, like in between sessions and stuff. And it's just setting that foundation of like a lot of open-ended questions, a lot of self-awareness. I'm like, hey, when you took that penalty, what were you thinking? Where was your attention? Where was your emotion level? Where was your sweet spot? All those things. And then we talk about it and say, okay, let's now create an imagery script or visualization exercise that puts you back in that situation. And now you have your desired reaction, not your emotional one, your proactive one. Right. So, and they can see themselves having that success and stuff. So it's all very similar, but like you said, you do tweak it depending on their maturity and their age.
So that reflection portion is key as well then.
Oh yeah. I mean, I still do it myself. We do it for all of our athletes. I encourage all of them to have a performance journal. We give them like a portfolio that we add stuff into all the time, but I encourage all of them to have like a personal performance journal.
And do you do that on a daily basis or after every session,
in terms of like journal entries and stuff, I would say at the end of like at least a couple times a week for them to do so, even if it's after every game, the morning of a game, you can do that. I think Sunday nights is a really good time for a lot of kids. It's like typically downtime. Reset.
Before the new week starts.
Sundays, unless you have a game or something, but Sundays between like 5 and 8 p.m. is usually like downtime.
Right.
So
right before that 8:30 NFL game starts.
Right before kickoff, that's right. And right before bed and stuff. So that's a time to typically sports are a lot of them are around the weekend. So what happened Friday night, what happened Saturday, what happened Sunday morning. Did I play well? Did I not? What did I do well? Where was my attention? How did I react? What do I want to work on this week? And getting them to focus more on the process is also tough because coaches and parents and our society primes them for outcome. Oh, what do you want to work on? I want to score more goals. Great. How are you going to do that? So let's break it down in terms of process goals. Do you need to protect the puck better? Do you need to be better on the forecheck? Do you need to come support your defense better? You need to work on your shot this week in practice. So everybody knows what they want to do. Some people know how they're going to do it, and some people, even fewer people, maybe know why it's important to them, right? So connecting it back to like, why do you want to score more goals? And that might sound like an obvious question to a lot of kids, but then they start talking about, they want to help their team and they want to, obviously have personal success, but they want to contribute and stuff like that. So
well, you hear a guy like Joel Embiid, he's just known for now, in quotes, trusting the process, right? That's all you hear now, and from him at least. And there's a lot of people that think that's more of a gimmick now, but it is so true on the process is everything from how you wake up in the morning every day before a game, what you're eating pre-game. There's so many different variables that you have to make sure that you're going through that correct process.
And then even mid-game, understanding your process goals, and we call them focus anchors. So where do you need to direct your attention to make good decisions and to play well, play at your best? The referee who missed a bad call, it might be frustrating, but it's irrelevant for you to be at your best. Period. So that takes a lot of discipline. And I'm, as a coach, I was on the bench yesterday, and we all get we're all human, we're all emotional, but resetting, knowing when I'm at my best, I'm doing this, and I'm feeling this, and I'm directing my attention here, and I need to read that information to make good decisions as a coach or as a player. So it's really difficult because sports are so emotional and aggressive, a lot of them, and physical, and we invest so much time and effort into them. Like, we're skipping friends' birthday parties, and we're not going on an all-inclusive trip to Cuba over Christmas. We're going to Kingston for a hockey tournament. You know what I mean? So we're sacrificing a lot to do this because we love it so much, we care so much about it, and because of that we can get so involved and so emotional. But understanding what's relevant and what's not for you to be at your best, it's hard. Like, there's no two ways about it.
I missed a lot of those family vacations, whatever it was, just because you got hockey tournaments, you got stuff that you made a commitment to your team, right? And that's all about that high performance and making sure that you're not going to be at your best unless you're playing as well. So tell me a bit about your now consistent elite performance, and originally when you reached out, I was very interested on this high performance strictly from an athletic perspective, but now you're talking about working with executives, moving on to high performance in general in life. So was that did that come from you personally? You're working with another business partner, you were saying as well, with this consistent elite performance. So tell me where that stemmed from. Did you guys join together?
Yeah, so we joined together a few years ago,
Okay.
and we both had some clients on the side as Cassie was finishing up his PhD, and I was teaching and coaching. And then about 2 years ago, a year and a half, 2 years ago, we created this consulting firm, Consistent Elite Performance, and trying to do private practice consulting full-time now, both of us. So he's very interested in doing sports psychology almost exclusively,
Okay.
and I really enjoy it as well, as you can tell. But a goal of mine too is to apply these principles into many different domains. So as I said before, no matter what you do, you're a performer.
Yeah.
Chances are you're part of a team, whether that's a marketing team, sales team, you work at a law firm, a bank, whatever it is. Principles of leadership, principles of performance anxiety, stress, confidence, focus, all those things apply to everybody.
Yeah.
So that's a new challenge for me, and a new kind of endeavor that I've been taking on the last 4 to 6 months, and it's really fun. I'm really enjoying it. Working with adults for the first time, really, on a consistent basis. So that's a whole new thing, and working with people who are really high achievers their whole life, and now they're maybe meeting some resistance for the first time or transitioning. A big one is transitioning from, like a peer, like you're a sales rep, and because you were very successful, now you've been promoted to director of sales.
Right.
So socially, you were a peer with everybody else, and now you're their boss or their supervisor or whatever. So that's an interesting transition.
For sure.
Additionally, you did very well in your own scope, but now you're managing people for maybe the first time, and you're in a leadership position for the first time. So that's a whole new bag of tricks that maybe you haven't been exposed to professionally yet. So that transition comes up a lot.
Yeah, it's funny how in the hierarchy of employment, if you do well, you get promoted to another job where you may not have any of the same responsibilities that you once had. Now you're managing people, which you may not actually be good at, but you're in that position because you did well, you sold more than everyone else, so you're put in that position, and unless you're given the proper training or the consistent elite performance approaches you don't necessarily have the skills and attributes to be able to manage those people effectively. So that's an interesting point that you bring up.
Yeah, and from the organization side, I think a question they have a lot as well, how do we assess for leadership skills to maybe promote someone to a leadership position when the job that they currently have does not need to demonstrate leadership skills?
Right.
It needs to demonstrate sales or client acquisition or whatever it is, and they do so well, so now they're promoted, and maybe it's not a great fit, or there's a huge learning curve at first and stuff like that. But from the organization's point of view, it's like, well, how do we mitigate that, right? So we would talk about that and have some assessments in place. Another big piece is team building, right? So we ask everyone we meet with, hey, you guys, how's your culture and your team building? And a common answer has come up. They're like, oh yeah, we do team building. For sure we do team building. I'm like, okay, great. Like, what do you do? They're like, oh, we go to Steam Whistle and we go to the Jays game and have a few beers and have a good time.
Yeah.
So that's fun. It's like, great. Like, that is awesome. That's really fun that you guys provide that experience for your employees. However, chances are any tensions or any conflict or any problems that were there Friday afternoon will most likely be there Monday morning, even though y'all had a few beers at the Jays game.
Yeah.
Right. So, that, I think, and that social gathering and that kind of hanging out with your coworkers outside of your office, like, that's important. Of course, that's important. It's fun. It does build social bonds and stuff like that. But in terms of working with actual, like research-based team building and culture development and leadership development, communication styles, things like that, I think there is a lack of that deliberate, specific programming.
Right.
And
so what's an example of somewhere, for instance, you've got an employment, we'll even take my workplace, for example. We go from 10, 11, 12 full-time staff throughout the year to 140 during the summer, super seasonal at the Buffalo Canoe Club. But, it's for 4 months that we have that amount of staff. But year-round, we've got this full-time group that is the core.
Sure.
So, for instance, this summer we played a weekly softball league, but again, it's that same, once a week. You don't necessarily get everything out that you need to get out, right? Whether you have to go attend the game or not, there's so many additional things that you can be doing at the workplace as well. Because as soon as you remove the workplace from people, the dynamic changes.
Yeah, of course.
So it's what would be, for instance, your way of getting a group of 10, 12, 15 individuals to really create that team building? Is it exercises that you do?
Yeah, so it's a lot of, there's a few different ways you can go about it, but the first thing would, it's all stemmed on communication and clear expectations. Okay. So again, it might sound obvious, but does everybody know the expectations of not only their job, but their place within the organization, the expectations on conduct, on behavior, on words? We all maybe have coworkers that are great at what they do, mm-hmm. but maybe they're kind of negative people who kind of bring the culture down, and their performance is fine, but the way they interact with people kind of is a drag. Right. So have we laid out the expectations for your job performance, your job description, but also how we expect you to behave? And when that's not met, it's not necessarily a negative thing. It's, hey, we need to have a honest conversation that there's a gap between how you're performing and the expectations. And it's a growth-based, future-based conversation. It's not, you didn't do this, you haven't done that, you screwed this up, you treated people poorly. That's all past tense. Okay, let's go future tense. Say, these are the behaviors and the words and the expectations we have moving forward. So there's a sense of, it's called uncomfortable truth-telling.
Right.
That's, again, very difficult for people. And, having those conversations from a leadership position to an employee can be awkward and can be difficult, and there's no two ways about that. But that's what great teams do. Mm-hmm. They, Mike Babcock, I think, calls it kitchen table accountability, something like that. So having the ability to speak honestly and having difficult conversations, I think, is one. The other thing is understanding what you need from your boss and what you need from each other. So if I ask you, hey Dave, whatever your role is, what do you need from your superiors? And some of the answers might be, well, I need resources, or I need direction, I need some autonomy to be able to do it myself, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And then your coworkers or your peers, okay, what do you need from that department? What do you need from that department? Hey, marketing department, what do you need from David?
Yeah.
And getting that out in the open, I think, is really important as well. And that way, again, it's very difficult and can be awkward at times to advocate for what you want. Like for you to walk into your boss's office and say, hey boss, I'm at my best. For me to be at my best, I think I need more autonomy from you. Like, that's a difficult thing to say.
For sure.
Right? But I think if you want to build great teams, the leadership group or the leader has to create that environment of, that's okay to say that.
Yeah.
Like people are often afraid to speak up. They're afraid to take risks, and it's all very. It's difficult for people to speak up because they're fear of getting reprimanded, fear of getting in trouble, making a mistake. So I think there's so many things that go into it. But if that leader or the leadership team can build that environment of, it's okay to make mistakes as long as we learn from them and grow. It's we have high expectations here and we expect you to meet them. So when things don't go well, we need to address them almost immediately. I think if we can think of more on the athlete side, but I'm sure on the business side too, teammates who don't work all that hard or who don't do their job, who are negative, who don't follow the rules, and the boss or the coach turns the other way, sooner or later everyone's going to look around and say, wow, he doesn't, what are we doing here?
Why am I doing this?
Why am I doing this? And they lose respect, they lose credibility. So you have to address that. And again, it's not what are you doing here? Wake up. It's nothing like that. But you need to say there's a huge gap here about what's going on and what we expect. So that level of communication, I think, is the number one thing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that absolutely it does. And I think it's very important for people to also understand that you need to have the confidence to be able to have that open conversation and dialogue, but two, make sure that what you're asking for is reasonable.
Yes.
And that's the, you mentioned the employee coming in and asking the boss for more autonomy. That's great, and if you're able to justify why you need that and you do a good job, then I think most employers would be happy to
absolutely
not micromanage you, right? But you have to look on the other side, and if you start performing poorly, then things have to change.
Yeah, like you need to have the confidence to do that, the ownership, the accountability, to stand up to and say, hey, I didn't get the job done, or I dropped the ball, or I didn't prepare you guys well enough.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of vulnerability too is huge. And it kind of goes, it's super counterintuitive, and maybe people are listening and thinking, well, what is this guy talking about? It goes against what we see as like leadership and confidence and dominant personalities and all that. I think that's outdated. Building trust now and creating an environment where people feel safe to make mistakes. Well, not make mistakes, feel safe to take risks.
Yeah.
Good, like you said, good risks.
Yeah.
And calculated risks and educated risks, but in a way that drives innovation, drives productivity, drives empowerment, engagement, rather than we're all stepping on eggshells because we don't want to get in trouble.
Yeah.
Like, do teams operate that way? Yeah, they do. But are they great teams that build? Like, probably not.
Yeah, and you you mentioned the why teams make turnarounds and end up performing really well later. It's because, hey, maybe you need that injection of new energy, new ideas, whatever it is. And I think it's interesting also when you've got teams, whether it's in a business setting or on athletics standpoint, where you have multiple generations that are playing, and the way that they also manage conflict and the way they deal with, constructive criticism, right? So you've got the coach who maybe 50, 60, 70 years old, who when he was a kid, they were getting bag skated, slapped on the wrist, whatever it was, whereas now we've got kids who are getting participation medals by placing 25th, right? And they don't necessarily deal with that constructive criticism the same way.
Sure. So I think that's a great point too. I think it's funny, I have a lot of this going on, but I was meeting with one company and they're very into it, and I think things will go well. And they kind of said that the one guy I was meeting with said, Matt, if you come into our boardroom or our board of governors room, and there's like 65, 10 65-year-olds in there, and you start talking about mindfulness and breathing, like they're gonna laugh you out of the room.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe not all of them would, but again, that generation is probably this is new for them.
For sure.
So he kind of redirected me to their a different department where it's mostly young professionals right out of their undergrad or right out of their MBA, and they're high performers. They're very driven. They want to get better, but they're in their 20s. So
open to the idea.
Stereotypically more open to the idea.
Yes.
In terms of getting a medal for crossing the street and participation medals, and I struggle with that in a way, and not in the way that maybe most people think. I hear the term entitled all the time working in youth sport. All these kids are entitled.
Yeah.
This generation's entitled. Millennials, blah blah blah. I don't really know what that means. Like I mean I know what entitled means, but for me, it's not about that. They've grown up in a different environment than you.
Yeah.
Are they more comfortable expressing their needs? Yes, they are. Maybe you weren't that comfortable expressing your needs 30 years ago or 20 years ago. And do you wish you could have? Maybe.
Yeah.
Or were you happy the way you were raised and coached and taught? Like maybe you were that too. But the fact that they're more comfortable expressing their needs, I don't think makes them entitled.
No.
Right? The environment that we've all grown up in the last 10 or 15 years is different. It's just
the way it is.
It's the way it is. You can bang your head against it and say, well, these kids are entitled, or you can say, how can I best create an environment, or how can I create an environment where they'll be at their best, period. Yeah. So if I'm a coach or a boss or the director, whatever, do I try to do things the way I was coached, or the way I was raised, or the way I was led 30 years ago, or do I try to understand what can I do to put them in a position for them to be at their best?
Yeah.
Period.
And I think that's crucial, right? Because then you talk about trying to understand, and a lot of people nowadays, when they're going through coaching, etc., they're not listening to what the people are asking for, what the kids, the youth, for instance, are asking for. And if they had taken the time to actually actively listen to what they're asking for, what they're talking about, then hey, maybe you can cater to that, right? Yeah. Obviously you can't do everything, but again, it goes back to making sure that you're actively listening to what their requests are, and if you can meet them, then maybe you're going to end up with one of your best athletes stemming from that, all from listening, who maybe isn't motivated the same way, banging the stick against the glass, whatever it is. For sure.
So I think, most people, when we're in a conversation, we don't really listen to listen, we listen to reply. Mm-hmm. Like when you're talking, I'm preparing my response, mm-hmm. right? And in terms of leadership, that's not a great way to communicate, right? Sure. So taking the time to, like you said, really understand. And Pete Carroll, head coach of the Seahawks, one of his principles, I think he often says, is learn the learner. So you need to learn about your players. You need to learn about your employees, what makes them tick, what motivates them. Mm-hmm. Why are they walking into this office every day for 5 days a week for a year? Like, what do they want to get out of this experience? Who are they? How can they be their most authentic selves? So the more, like you said, the more you can understand that, I think is how you get the best out of people.
For sure. Yeah. So tell me a bit about when you've got an athlete or a group of parents, coaches, a whole team, for instance, what's the ideal length of time, or is there an ideal length of time? Do you feel like you see results within a week, 6 months, a year? Do you need, is it a 5-year process? It could be a lifetime journey.
Yeah.
Right? What's your... So
I would say most of our clients are at least a year.
Okay.
And some we've had for 4 years now. And maybe the frequency of meeting shifts. Like in season, we meet twice a month, a couple times, every other week, something like that, maybe even more. Off season, maybe we'll have a phone call once a month, or we'll touch base a little bit. But it's kind of a wave there. Mm-hmm. With teams, I mean, again, typically we have an ongoing relationship for a season,
right?
Just because the coach may change, a lot of players may change. But I think if you do a good job and you maintain that and you build a good relationship with the coaching staff and the players and the parents, you might not see them once a week or every other week like you would with an individual client, mm-hmm. but it's an ongoing situation. In terms of when you can see results, the best answer I can give is it depends.
Yeah.
It depends how mature the kids are, depends on my job building trust with them, depends on the parents, depends on the coach, depends on their age. It just, some teams just grasp onto it right away and really they're into it, and our sessions are loud and engaging, and they're into it, and they're funny, and they give great answers. I was working, when I first moved home, an 9-year-old hockey team, AAA, 9 years old. And we went through this team development thing and culture creation and values, and the answers they gave blew me away. 9 years old, and talking about, they want to help their community, and they want to represent their team well, and they want to be the most sportsmanlike team in the league, and they want to volunteer. And 9 years old.
Yeah. So
that team was totally into it, and other teams are just more quiet and maybe a little more unsure of what this is all about, and yeah, so there's tons of variables. Mm-hmm. And in terms of results, same thing. You can see behavior change pretty quickly in some people.
Yeah.
And other people, it takes a lot longer, right? So even in individual clients, some people in the first month they adopt the strategies, it clicks for them, and again, they're not perfect every time, but you can see that transformation.
Right.
Where with other clients, it might take a bit longer, mm-hmm. for sure.
And do you find that if you've got a group of athletes and there's sort of one bad apple maybe that doesn't necessarily feel like mindfulness or this psychology is something that they should be working on, do you identify that and try and work more individually with that person, or are you trying to foster that group mentality? How do you approach that? Because I'm sure based on, even though society has changed in understanding of psychology and more of how it can positively affect a team, there's still that case where they've got that parent that's telling them, I don't give a shit about this. Yeah. We're just going to go out and work hard, and you're going to score goals, right?
Exactly. So when you're working with large groups, there's typically the rule of thirds. So 1/3 will be totally into it, on the edge of their seat. I'm into this. I think this can help. Let's do it. I'm so engaged. Then there's a third who's like, this is cool. Like, I'm kind of hesitant, but I'm into it. We'll see. And then there's a third who's like, this isn't for me. Right? So again, it's our job as consultants to help them resonate with the material and understand, like, you might not resonate with 100% of it, but is there one or two things that resonate for you?
Right.
And typically it's a lot of the athletes who don't want to express any vulnerability, right? Where, I don't need that, right? Yeah. And that's obviously a bit of a shield for a lack of confidence and things like that. So you do, again, going back to our previous conversation, you try to understand that resistance rather than just bang on it with a hammer.
Yeah.
So you try to understand, why are they resistant? What's going on for them? And then you get a read from the coach. How is this guy or girl as a player? Are they disruptive? Are they a captain? Like, what's their deal?
Yeah.
So you try to get a better picture of it. And then, as you work through the season and you get to know the players a bit more, you can have those more personal one-on-one conversations as to, hey, I noticed that this is a bit of a pattern for you. Do you remember this conversation we had about mindfulness or imagery or whatever? Like, have you been using your imagery script? Yeah. How do you think this can help? And I would say usually it does break down a little bit. Again, some athletes will always have some resistance. It depends on the coaches as well. If typically the coaches bought in, but sometimes they're not all the way bought in.
Still skeptical.
A little skeptical, and it's a lot of like, well, we didn't have this when I was coach, so, or just like you said, go out there and compete and work hard, and it's like, well, there's probably more to it than that. So, if the coaches are on board, it's a lot easier for us, obviously. But like we said, you try to understand where that resistance is coming from, and in my experience, providing more information when there's resistance is not helpful. Eliciting information is helpful. So if someone's like not listening, not paying attention, kind of disruptive, just telling them, oh, this is going to help, or this will help you deal with the ref more, like, it's going to go right in one ear out the other. Like, okay, coach, whatever. If you can take them aside or say, is there a time where you felt frustrated? Or is there a time where you got off your game and you didn't like the way you treated your teammates, or whatever? Yeah. Some sort of open-ended question. Having them express it is a lot more helpful. Yeah. And I think that's the same in business or just communication in general, where when you meet resistance, try not to provide more information, try to elicit information and ask better questions, ask good questions. And some people may be like, I'm not answering that right now. You say, okay, but whenever you're ready, we can talk about it. Yeah. And you just kind of create that space for them to talk about it. So, yeah, there's a lot of moving parts for sure. Yeah,
well, I've certainly learned a lot, even just in this past hour, about, looking internally about how I manage things, just thinking, going through, I'm like, oh man, there's so many different areas where you now identify, you look back and you do that reflection and you try and understand where you went wrong, and, there's that light bulb that goes off.
For sure. I was going to say, there's talk about reflection, and everybody has a pregame routine. Yeah. Typically, it's only physical, so we try to implement a mental pregame routine too, so your mind is ready to perform as well as your body. But then very few people have a postgame routine. Yeah. Right. So do you get home? Once the adrenaline is kind of worn down, do you journal? Do you assess things? I think one potential misstep for parents is that car ride home. Right. They want to process the game right then and there. Maybe the kid is still, I shouldn't say emotional, but just high adrenaline.
For sure.
Hasn't come down yet. And again, that typically, I think the parent provides a lot of information, provides that assessment, rather than, hey, how'd it go? How'd you feel? Were you a good teammate? Like, asking those open-ended questions. But having that post-game routine, I think, can be a really healthy thing in terms of journaling, whether it's on a Word document or in an actual book that they write in, or just some people like to do it audio into their phone, and, hey, I did this, or this is what I want to work on, and then they listen to it before bed or whatever. So having some sort of mechanism for a post-game routine, I think, is really important too.
Yeah, it's something I'm definitely going to implement now, just into my daily routine, even if it's just 5 minutes, reflecting on how I handled even a specific situation. There's so many different things in your daily life that you can analyze and constant improvement, right? And I think that's where you're talking about that constant elite performance. It's every day in your life.
Yeah, I think the one thing I try to think about as a coach more so is like, what's going to dictate my behavior today, right? Is it going to be my emotions and the ref making bad, or as I deem them, bad calls, a player making the same mistake 3 times in a row, and now I'm getting frustrated and I'm screaming and yelling or not being the coach I want to be, or what's going to dictate my behavior today, my coaching philosophy, my values, my expectations of myself and the players, my awareness. Like, typically our emotions dictate our behavior a lot, right? So just asking yourself that question. I mean, I try to do that every game. I don't always, like I said yesterday, I had a bit of a blow up that I'm not proud of, but like you said, we go through it. They happen, and you learn from them and you move on. But just trying to ask yourself that question. Even if you're dealing with a sales team, a marketing team, whatever, like, what's going to dictate my behavior today and my words and how I interact with people. And do you have that awareness and that separation between stimulus and response? Right? Something bad happens, some adversity hits, something frustrating happened. Do you just react right away and respond in a negative, a frustrated way, or can you take that breath and be like, okay, this is a cool opportunity for me to demonstrate some compassion or some patience, like trying to reframe it.
For sure.
And when I say stuff like that, people often, I think, interpret it as like, oh, you're sugarcoating it and everything has to be positive. And it's not that at all. But like, this is how high performing teams function. This is how high performing people function. It's like, you reframe adversity as an opportunity for growth. Period. And so and even the fact that you're cognizant of that blow up yesterday. You've been able to identify it, and today you're standing here, you're talking about it openly, which is huge, because that way moving forward, you know exactly what you did, and you don't want to make that same mistake again, right? So now knowing that and being aware of it, you can identify situations and learn from it, right? Hey, maybe I shouldn't go out and bang on the glass. Maybe I shouldn't do this, that, or the other thing. And so it's that constant self-awareness that's huge, and that's what everyone... And that's the thing, too, where, even clients we've had for a year, 2 years, I think they've shown a lot of growth, but at times they're 12 years old and they bang their stick, or they take a slashing penalty behind the play, or they lip off at their coach, or something happens, and then they're upset, the parents are upset, the coach is upset. And yes, in an ideal world, we're perfect and we never overreact and we're not emotional, but we're human beings. So imagine being 13. Like, you have a lot going on. So when you make a mistake, it's like, okay, let's have some self-compassion. Let's create a plan for a more proactive approach, like you said earlier. And, how would you have liked to respond to that adversity or that trigger or that cue or whatever, right? So I think that self-compassion is key. And again, not blaming other people and not taking ownership is not what I'm talking about. But taking ownership, saying, I screwed up, or that's not how I want to be. Stand up in front of your team and apologize or display that humility, but have that plan moving forward. Yeah, absolutely. Well, my plan moving forward is to keep that daily journal, and then I think I'll probably be in constant contact with you, trying to learn more and probing some questions out of you, seeing if I can get any more. And remind some people again where they can find you on social media. Sure. So our website is consistenteliteperformance.com, and then that's our tag for any social media. So Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. It's Consistent Elite Performance. And you can find, like I said, all sorts of little videos and tidbits and stuff there. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. This is Matt Comand on the 6th episode of the Athletes Podcast. Don't forget to rate, listen, and review the podcast on iTunes or any listening platform that you have. Really appreciate you coming on, coming down to St. Catharines, and look forward to seeing what you guys are able to put forward in the future. Thanks very much. All right. Take care, Athletes Podcast listeners.